It's strange, really, the way we walk through life feeling so certain of our choices, our judgments, and our memories, as if we're always at the steering wheel of our own minds. We like to think we know who we are, why we do what we do, and that we see the world as it truly is. Then along comes a book like Subliminal by Leonard Mlodinow that gently, almost mischievously, peels back that comforting illusion, revealing something far more humbling and, in its way, far more beautiful. The idea that so much of what makes us who we are happens below the surface of our awareness, shaped by forces we barely glimpse. When I first picked up Subliminal, I expected a familiar sort of pop psychology tour, an entertaining collection of surprising experiments, some quirky anecdotes, and a few life hacks to avoid bias. What I found instead was a quietly transformative exploration of what it means to be human. Mlodinow's gift lies not just in his ability to explain complex neuroscience and psychology in clear, witty prose, but in the way he invites us to see our minds, and by extension ourselves and each other, with more compassion and curiosity. At its heart, Subliminal is about the unconscious mind, not the Freudian world of hidden childhood traumas and forbidden desires, but a far more mundane, pervasive, and scientifically grounded unconscious. It is the backstage manager of our lives, the vast network of processes that filter, interpret, and frame our perceptions long before anything bubbles up to our conscious awareness. And what's so quietly astonishing about Mlodinow's account is how seamlessly these hidden processes shape everything from who we trust to what we remember, often without us realizing it at all. The book opens with stories that feel, at first, almost amusing. Judges, Mlodinow tells us, are significantly more likely to deny parole to prisoners just before lunch, when they're hungry and tired, than after they've eaten. Candidates with easier-to-pronounce names tend to fare better in elections. Even the background color of a website can influence which product a customer chooses, as subtle cues prime our unconscious mind to prefer certain traits over others. These aren't just academic curiosities. They hint at a profound truth. The world we believe we're consciously navigating is, in reality, shaped by unconscious biases and shortcuts we didn't choose and barely notice. Mlodinow writes not as a detached scientist but as a fellow traveler, amused, amazed, and sometimes unsettled by the discoveries he shares. His humor is gentle, self-deprecating, and never forced. You get the sense that he's genuinely fascinated by the hidden workings of the mind, and that fascination becomes contagious. It's a conversation, not a lecture, the kind of conversation that lingers in your mind long after the book is closed. One of the book's most memorable explorations is the idea of implicit association, the unconscious linking of concepts that shapes our judgments and behavior. In experiments like the implicit association test, people asked to quickly sort words into good and bad categories unconsciously reveal biases they consciously reject. Even those who sincerely believe in equality often react faster when good is paired with images of people from their own racial group. These findings aren't about condemning ourselves as secretly prejudiced monsters, Mlodinow insists. Rather, they reveal the quiet, inherited patterns our minds absorb from the world around us. That distinction between unconscious bias and deliberate prejudice is one of the book's most compassionate contributions. It's a call not for guilt, but for awareness, to recognize that these biases exist not because we're bad people, but because we're human. And that awareness isn't an end point. It's a starting point for questioning our reflexive judgments and building systems to help counteract them. What makes Subliminal especially engaging is how Mlodinow shows these unconscious processes at work in everyday life, not just in laboratories. He explains how the mind's automatic search for patterns can make us see meaning in randomness. Why we hear a hidden message in a song played backward or believe we're due for a lucky break after a string of bad luck. He describes how our memories, far from being fixed recordings, are constantly reconstructed, shaped by suggestion, emotion, and what we want to believe. It's humbling to realize that even the stories we tell ourselves about who we are, the narratives built from our memories, are less stable than we'd like to think. Yet rather than making this sound alarming or hopeless, Mlodinow's tone is quietly reassuring. It's as if he's saying, yes, our minds play tricks on us, but that's part of what makes us wonderfully complex creatures. Our unconscious isn't an enemy to be conquered. It's an essential part of how we navigate a world too rich in information for conscious processing alone. One of the most intriguing sections for me explored how these unconscious processes shape our social interactions. Mlodinow describes experiments showing that in the first split second of meeting someone, we unconsciously decide whether we trust them, like them, or feel threatened by them, decisions that often guide our later conscious judgments. Even factors as subtle as facial symmetry, voice tone, or body language, often processed outside awareness, play a role. We might rationalize these feelings afterward: he seemed confident, or she didn't make eye contact. But the gut reaction came first. This idea feels unsettling at first. The thought that so many of our seemingly reasoned judgments about others are quietly choreographed by invisible processes. Yet it also explains so much about why misunderstandings, biases, and snap judgments are so common, even among well-meaning people. Mlodinow doesn't suggest we can rid ourselves of these unconscious tendencies entirely, but by recognizing their existence, we can create a little space between reaction and response. Equally fascinating is Mlodinow's exploration of self-perception. We see ourselves as unified, consistent individuals with clear motives and beliefs, but much of what we know about ourselves is, in fact, a narrative crafted by the conscious mind to explain unconscious impulses. When asked why they prefer one painting over another, people often invent plausible but inaccurate explanations. Even our sense of will, the feeling that we consciously initiate our actions, can be shown in experiments to arise after the brain has already begun the movement. This isn't to say we're puppets of our unconscious. Mlodinow's point is subtler. The conscious and unconscious mind are partners, not rivals. The unconscious handles the flood of information and quick judgments. The conscious mind steps in to reflect, to plan, and sometimes to override. The interplay is what makes us capable of both spontaneous creativity and deliberate reflection. By weaving scientific findings into everyday language and examples, Mlodinow avoids the trap of making the unconscious mind feel like an alien force. Instead, he shows it as part of who we are. The part that quietly loves familiar songs, feels nervous in crowded elevators, or remembers our childhood homes with fondness tinged by nostalgia rather than accuracy. Reading Subliminal, I found myself reflecting on my own assumptions and reactions. Why did I instinctively trust one colleague and feel cautious around another? How much of my confidence in a decision came from facts, and how much from a gut feeling shaped by past experiences? Mlodinow doesn't provide simple answers, but he offers a framework for asking better questions, and that feels paradoxically empowering. What also stands out is his humility. Mlodinow never writes as if he's above these unconscious influences. He admits to his own biases and surprises, sharing anecdotes that reveal his fascination and occasional frustration with his mind's hidden workings. This makes the book feel less like a lecture and more like a shared exploration. Toward the end, Subliminal circles back to an idea that feels, to me, quietly hopeful: that the very forces that bias us can also help us. Our unconscious mind is shaped by experience, culture, and even intention. By choosing our environments, questioning our assumptions, and staying open to feedback, we can nudge our unconscious patterns in healthier directions. It's not about erasing bias entirely, an impossible task, but about cultivating greater awareness and humility. Reflecting now, what lingers isn't fear of how little conscious control we have, but a softer, more forgiving understanding of myself and others. It reminds me that when someone makes a snap judgment, forgets a promise, or acts from a place of fear, there are unseen stories and inherited biases at play. It doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it invites compassion alongside accountability. And perhaps most importantly, Subliminal nudges us to turn that compassion inward, to see our flaws not as signs of personal failure, but as part of the shared human condition. Beings whose conscious minds ride on the surface of a vast, mysterious sea of unconscious currents. Mlodinow doesn't claim to have all the answers, and that, I think, is part of the book's quiet strength. Instead, he leaves us with questions worth living with. How can we create systems and habits that help counteract unconscious bias? How can we stay curious about our own reactions rather than blindly trusting them? And how might embracing the complexity of our minds deepen, rather than diminish, our sense of responsibility and connection to others? In the end, Subliminal isn't just a book about psychology or neuroscience. It's an invitation to humility and, paradoxically, to greater agency. By understanding how much of what shapes us lies beyond our awareness, we can become gentler judges, wiser planners, and perhaps better companions to ourselves and each other. It turns out that recognizing how little we consciously control doesn't make us weaker. It makes us, in a strange and beautiful way, more deeply human. And in that recognition, Mlodinow suggests, lies not just insight, but the possibility of kindness, both for the hidden forces within us and for the equally complex minds all around us.